You are listening to the Fresh Take Network.
About Black Widow, and I'd like to welcome in Andy Kenyar and Makayla Berze. We did the Big Brother stuff with her, and very exciting time in Big Brother. Really quick before we get to Black Widow, did you catch up on Big Brother?
I did. Yep, I'm all caught up. Even on the spoilers, I'm all caught up.
Oh, even the spoilers. I don't think Andy and I are just yet. So, Devan, you can stay on mute for 2 seconds before we get into Black Widow here. Just because I know Andy and I talked about this, and I wanted to talk to you about this for 2 seconds. Just, I haven't read spoilers yet coming into tonight's episode, but just how bad Frenchie's gameplay was in that Sunday episode.
Horrible. And you guys don't even know. I won't spoil it, but it is a mess. Like, it is a mess. And it's just like, what are you doing? It's probably the worst gameplay I've seen like in the past like 5 seasons. Like, I don't know who's had a worse game like besides like probably since Devan from BB16. Like, it's that bad.
It's always the Devons.
Cannot be trusted.
Andy, I know you just had really quick thoughts.
The problem is you backstab everyone and then everyone just backstabs you.
So. No, the problem with this dude is he just said everybody is safe. And he's like, particularly like, no, I'm not putting up a woman. And then he put up a woman.
Yeah.
Just bad. Like, I know you had a quick thought, Andy.
Move basically guaranteed that he's out week 2.
Yeah. Pretty much.
We'll see. Like, this house is changing so much. And the teams are so big though, because it's like he can win comps. So his team may be like, we might want to keep him safe if he can win another HOH 2 weeks down the line and keep us safe. And then it's like you have someone in your team that the other people in the house can go against. So the teams really have like made it interesting, but that's only going to last like probably 2-3 weeks tops, like we've mentioned. But yeah.
Okay. Well, and remember, so the BBP is what I'm calling it for now, until we come up with a wittier name. But the BBP will be out every single Monday with me and Makayla. And we'll have people come on once in a while, but very excited for that. But now let's talk about the first MCU movie in 2 years since the pandemic, Black Widow. And it's interesting because I think we split this because Makayla, you saw this in the theater, correct?
I did. Yeah, I saw it opening Friday night.
Perfect. So Andy and you saw it in the theater and Devan and I did premiere access. So different side of everything. So I guess I'll let you take the floor first, Makayla, and just kind of give your initial thoughts of everything.
Yeah, for sure. This movie is something I think all of us have been waiting for, but especially me. I've loved Natasha since she made her debut, and like literally cried like a baby when she had her scene in Endgame. But this movie, like, I had really high expectations for it. It met those expectations. Probably give it an 8 out of 10. I think it would have been a bit more meaningful if it actually came out in sequence of the timeline. But really great. And I have to say, like, Florence Pugh stole the show. I already knew she was going to be awesome. And then seeing her, she just embodied Yelena, like made her such a great character. And she's going to be so exciting to see in the future. And I think she's kind of like what the MCU thought people wanted to react to Brie Larson as. Florence Pugh is what the fans actually, I think, want instead of what they thought Brie Larson would be. No hate to Brie Larson. I love Captain Marvel. But Florence as Yelena is incredible.
I think every single male officially hated Zach Braff even more after watching this movie. They're like, oh man, I hate Zach Braff. Yeah. I think she's the best. I mean, for you too, not to spoil too much, but this is your first time seeing Valentina, which is the way that it originally was to be intended, was to meet Valentina this way.
Yes, because Black Widow was supposed to come out in 2019 before, because Valentina's in the Captain America Winter Soldier thing.
Yeah, she's in that. Yeah, she's Lady Hydra.
Yes.
We don't know her whole backstory. Even in that, we still have a very mixed reaction of what Valentina is just yet. But
okay.
Yeah, Andy and I kind of talked about this off air as well. Like, I think this movie would have been better if it had happened before Endgame and Infinity War, because the stakes would have been a little more higher. I thought the movie was fun. I thought Florence Pugh was the highlight, especially like making fun of the superhero landing type of stuff. Her comedy side, and then her dramatic side too, when she talked about the family dynamic, I really thought was great. I didn't think there was like necessarily like a villain. I know like Draco or whatever is the villain, but I think the villain was more or less just kind of dealing with who you are and who your family is and what that means. To have the few problems I had in it. One is just I think it's a situation if you're a comic fan, Taskmaster is just not anywhere near what Taskmaster is in this. But that's a fan if that's a problem if you're a fan of the comics. If you're a fan of the movies, then it doesn't matter. It's really irrelevant. It's a fine character. And then just my other short thing that I had a little bit of a problem with was, is Natasha a super soldier? Because she got blown up in a car twice. She fell out of Elena's building and literally hit a pipe on her back and never got scratched. And then she fell out of the sky to fight Taskmaster before she hit with the powder and nothing happened. I know it's just a movie, it's suspend your disbelief, but I'm just like, man, did she take like the super soldier serum or something and we just never knew about it? Because like, she is just like, even Elena gets out of the car crash, like, oh, my hand, man, this sucks. And she's just like, I'm good, let's go in that vent. Like, what? There's just no consequences at all for Black Widow here.
I'll just jump in, and I think for me that didn't really bother me because I just saw Fast and Furious 9. I won't spoil it, but it's pretty ridiculous. Yeah. So whatever happened to Natasha, I was like, oh yeah, she's totally okay with that.
She's got like, the powers of Dom.
Yeah, exactly. Family. Yeah. It's about family, you guys.
It was about family. That's a good point, Andy.
I think it just would have been so much easier if at some point during this movie there would have been like every widow goes into the Red Room and gets like a version of their super soldier serum, because then it would have been like retroactive, everything that was like crazy about her character and all the crazy stuff that she's done. You would have been like, oh, okay, that retcons that super nice, neat bow on it, and everything is easy going forward. And it just would have been such a simple line that they could have wrote into this, that it would have allowed Yelena to be obviously a little bit more superpowered going forward, but it would have answered a lot of reasons of how Natasha hasn't been killed 80 times in her 12 movies that she's been in. And yeah, like it would have been one line of dialogue would have just solved that entire problem. But
they did have one line of dialogue. It was like, pain is like weakness leaving the body.
That's true.
The best line though would have not have worked though, because when Yelena says, "Yeah, I don't think your god from space takes ibuprofen after a fight," would not have been relevant at that moment. So I thought, yeah, well, I guess that's a good joke. You can't screw that one up.
Just your first initial thoughts overall, Andy.
I really liked it. For me, I was a big, I think I messaged you when I got into the theater, like just that I'm a huge movie goer. Like I like to go to theater and to sit down, bag of popcorn, feet up in the recliner seats. And, just watching the Shang-Chi trailer, I was like, yep, this is it. This is why I like going to the movies. There's an event aspect of it that I didn't realize how much I was going to miss until, I would basically sat down. I saw it on a Friday matinee, and I went back and saw it with my little guy on Sunday afternoon. So I got it twice. And, for me, it was the first thing that really struck me was just that the aspect of being back in the theater was so amazing. I think I messaged you right at the end, Josh. I said, how much better is this movie if it does come out in sequence? If this comes out between Civil War and Infinity War, I think a lot of the problems that occurred in this, you would have been so much easier to justify, and it wouldn't have felt as out of place. And like you said, Josh, like the stakes of it would have been escalated, because here she's going to live to the end. so I think if they would have done it that way, then the movie in general just makes so much more sense. I had it as a 7.5 out of 10. You know, I had it kind of right in line with the, you know, Doctor Strange, you know, sort of level of my happiness. Um, Again, you know, I think as much as, you know, this was about Florence Pugh and obviously her role moving forward. I think I got to the end of it and I was like, yeah, a lot of the scene stealing moments were all for Florence Pugh, but I think it really shows how great Scarlett is and how good she is in this role, because she didn't really get rolled in this. Like, yes, a couple of the scene stealing moments were definitely written for Florence, but you know, the most impressive part was just that, you know, Scarlett looks and fits the role so well. Like, you can tell it's just such a comfortable person for her to be in a role, and I thought that part was awesome. You know, the quick dialogue back and forth when they're at the kitchen table is just so perfect, and it just shows how comfortable she is in that Natasha Romanoff role. And you know, it's for her, you know, being an original Avenger and never having had this, you know, backstory truly vetted out. I think that really ties that part of, you know, really the first 3 phases of the MCU up really nice and neat and tidy in terms of those characters. And again, it, you know, it pushes Yelena down the road, but it also, you know, the character of Red Guardian and that are people that you're like, now how are we going to find ways to get him into something else?
Yeah.
You know, I want to see a flashback scene of him with Cap, if that actually happened, or if he's just bullshitting his way through that entire story. It really did open up a bunch of avenues that I think going forward, you know, I think there's like 5 Disney Plus shows that you could create on a napkin in about 20 minutes after watching the movie. So yeah, like I said, 7.5 out of 10. And just a great trip back to the movies. I think when you know, Makayla, you haven't watched the Disney Plus shows, but a lot of the criticism sometimes of Disney Plus has been the pacing, that it's not necessarily the best in terms of, you know, doing a, you know, an 8-hour story as opposed to doing a 2-hour story. And this is just a reminder of how good Marvel really is at pacing in a movie. And that there is some work to be done, I think, in some of the Disney Plus shows. And with that said, I think Loki was a much better version of a paced show than what we saw out of WandaVision and Falcon and Winter Soldier.
Dev. Follow that.
Oh boy. Yeah. I actually stopped paying attention halfway through. I'm sorry. So if I repeat your points, I'm just kidding. Okay. So first and foremost, I want to state that if this inspires, you know, some little girl somewhere in any way to dress up like them as for Halloween, it's done its job. So I'm not going to comment on any of those kinds of points like that. I'm wondering if this movie came out 5 years ago, would the story be the same? Probably not. I found this story to be a little inconsequential to the whole realm of things. One of the big things I think about is, so now we have all these great good widows now. Well, where were they in Endgame or Infinity War? Or
that's the
like
problem
that,
with
right?
this, right? It's like, where's Florence Pugh? Where's Red Guardian?
Exactly. So I don't want to get too
Working
down.
for Val.
I don't want to get too down into that rabbit hole, but just a couple nitpicks itself. So we have a bunch of flawless spies living in the United States in the early 90s, but suddenly they aren't able to execute that American accent at any point in the future, which is kind of weird. I know you've been in Russia for like 20 years, but at the same time, I'm kind of tired of English actors faking bad Russian accents with perfect English grammar and syntax. So if you're going to do an accent, at least speak it the way of a fluent speaker would, with translating it in your mind and things like that. So when you have perfect English grammar, it really throws me off. So just use the English accents as if you were that real family. So in that case, I think you're kind of a bad spy.
Makayla's getting the first hand of
What
a
the
Devan
criticisms
review right now.
I think the criticisms of Natasha being a super soldier are both founded, but also at the same time of kind of inconsequential. Doesn't really matter at the end of the day. I am really curious as to how they both jumped into that the ceiling tile grate thing. Did one of them boost the other one up? I would have liked to, because that grate was like 12 feet high. They also talked about their big plan in the open at some gas station, with the gas station attendant just sitting there listening to them, which I thought was a little weird. Yelena mentions that Black Widow is on the cover of magazines, yet no one recognizes her when they're drinking beers at a cafe at some point in time. Whatever country they're in, that the guy with like the backdoor garage is fixing a brand new BMW. Kind of weird. BMWs are notoriously tricky to fix, so you think you take it to a
Okay,
BMW
you're really
certified dealer.
nitpicking now.
No,
You're
I'm
really
just-
nitpicking. Calm down.
So of course I am. That's just kind of me.
I'm gonna
me.
call you out on that one.
It's fine. Those things don't really matter. The story itself. Did anything happen that causes ramifications for the future of the MCU? I don't really think so.
We don't know yet. We don't know yet. Having the widows out there, that could have something. I think it's kind of like with what we saw in Sorry, Makayla, but just what we saw in Falcon Winter Soldier with the Wakandans, right, and having the Dharma Langu or whatever they're called, like
Dora Milaje.
Dora Milaje. It's just kind of another set of badass woman assassins that are all kind of out there, which again, I think the MCU needs far more of that. And I think we're going to get that in the Marvels with Captain Marvel and Miss Marvel and Monica Rambeau in there. So that's good. So I think that's kind of where we're going to go. I don't know what Taskmaster is going to be. I hope it's a Mandarin situation where it's just like, this isn't the real Taskmaster. We'll just reset.
Well, realistically, they definitely Wolverine origined Taskmaster, and I'm not going to be the kind of person that says, in the comics, he or she should act a certain way or be funny or not be funny. But to make it a mindless drone that use some gas on that makes them good is a little lazy, when you can probably stretch out. You could use Taskmaster in a multitude of projects and copy various different styles. I mean, essentially we got some like kind of nice movie sequences of him copying various hero poses, and that was about it. Also Dreykov's, well, I know, but it gives you the intention that it's a male villain.
Some
right?
people, I'm interested in your thought on this really quick, Makayla. Sorry to interrupt, Devan. Was the Taskmaster suit being a male look problematic?
That's always an interesting question, right? Because it's just like, you always have two sides where it's you have that feminist perspective where just like, if you're a woman, you're a woman, or if you have that perspective that it's like equality, who cares, just do whatever you want. I don't really play into those things that much anymore. I don't really care. I think sometimes at the end of the day, it's a stylistic choice from the director, the producer, costume designer. And I think also in this case, it helps throw people off of who Taskmaster actually was to the plot of the story, with it being Antonia. So maybe that's just like why they went that direction.
I think you have to look at Dreykov himself and his view of women.
True.
He thinks very little of them. And if he's the one who obviously creates the suit, he is not playing into the positivity of the feminine form. So the idea that he is the creator of the suit and creates it in a male image, I think based on the story, makes a lot of sense.
And that's spot on as well. And then that other perspective too is that when you kind of do those women costumes, it could sexualize almost. I mean, we know how Scarlett's had to deal with that in her press conferences all the time. So maybe it's also like, let's just do like a generic suit, like a unisex suit, so that we're not drawing attention to any certain parts of the female body. But I think Andy actually nailed it on the head with the Dreykov impression, and that's what he designed, and his idea of how, or his little idea of what women are. And perfect.
They're just
tactical hoods. So in right now. The suit looks great. I will give that a shout out in particular.
The part that I didn't like is the hood is part of that. Like from an animation standpoint, the hood makes the costume so cool. And for 90% of the movie, the hood is back, and I'm like, that's the best part.
I was confused because Dreykov states that in order to get Taskmaster to be Taskmaster, there's a chip implanted in their mind.
Yeah.
And then essentially they are turned by the same gas that affects the current generation of Black Widows. So is she programmed via a chip, or is she programmed via the traditional methods of Black Widows?
I think they explained that the chip is what helps her to take in like the heads-up display and helps her mimic things. It's not the mind control aspect, it's the aspect that gives her her powers or her ability to fight the way she does.
Okay. And then can we talk about the pheromonal shield really quickly?
Dude, that's right out of the comics. So
no, I get that, but there's a lot of things.
It is what it is.
Okay, well then just stand like 10 feet away and shoot him. Like, I don't know what's.
Yeah, that's what happened in the Ryan George pitch meeting. He's like, you can't just stay 20 minutes. Like, strong pheromones. They're really strong. Again, right? Like, let's kind of go in the realm of what Makayla was talking about in that Fast 9 side of script writing. It was like, just ignore things. I mean, at least they had the thing where she pounded her head and like took away the senses. That was kind of a smart play with everything like that. And I think at least added to a side of tension for the Natasha character, at least, to be like, this is someone that's ruined her life. She so badly wants to kill, but she can't. So I think they added, because Dreykov is really nothing. He's just a mobster, more or less, right? So it added to, yeah, you could stay 10 feet away and probably shoot him, but I think it did help add like the tension to the struggle that Natasha had of, you know, she sacrificed her almost humanity the first time to kill this guy, right? To get into S.H.I.E.L.D. and then become an Avenger more afterwards. So here she is again now trying to just do what she thought the first time, just to end this guy, because she sacrificed so much just to get out of it, of this guy that's ruined her life, took her away from her livelihood. And so at least you kind of had that scene to kind of see the struggle of her not being able to end him.
And I think too, the you know, to go off of, you know, one of your other comments, Devan, is, you know, the idea in terms of this movie moving the MCU forward in that, I think it's the problem of the fact that they have basically set this movie in a little hole in the gap of the previous movies. The role of this movie isn't necessarily to move the MCU forward. It's to like fill in the blanks of what you don't know about the character, which I think is the challenge. That's why I say, like, I think if you would have had this movie come out where it wasn't just being wedged into a hole, where it's really, its whole point is to, you know, color in the lines, not necessarily make a new drawing, you know, it probably would have had more consequence and impact and been something that you'd be like, hey, this is why, you know, these are the next steps in terms of where the MCU is moving, that it's going to work. The one thing I do agree with you though, in terms of like, you know, the threat of the villain, I think for a lot of fans in this, the street level characters that are like the Natashas, you know, when we get into people like Daredevil or even Spider-Man to a certain extent, the scope of the villain has to match the scope and powers of the bad guy. And if you're constantly thinking that Black Widow is going to fight Thanos in order for it to have meaning, and I think there's a real recipe here for a lot of fans, and I've seen it in a lot of the critiques of the movie, that, you know, oh, the villain is just so inconsequential. And it's like, it is going to be what you have with these characters that are not super powerful, because their impact on like how many people could they hurt, and what sort of like overall negative impact are they going to have on the world? The reality is that's pretty small. And it does really, I think, limit, and I would bet money you're going to see the exact same thing in Shang-Chi a little bit, because yes, the Mandarin is a global gangster and he's got the rings of power, but Shang-Chi can only do so much. He doesn't have superpowers as such, really. So the consequence of the villain in these more street level characters, I think, is going to be something that when we go into these movies, we're going to have to reset our expectations, because it's just never going to live up to, you know, when we get into the Thanoses and the Galactuses, the Dr. Dooms of the world, or, you know, Kang the Conquerors of the world, we're going to be like, man, why? Like, these guys can affect the entire universe. And they're like, yeah, but this guy can hurt 3 people on my corner. You know, that it's a very different scope of villain. And I just think that that's going to be a reality of a challenge that the MCU is going to face going forward with the different power tiers of their characters.
Absolutely.
Especially when you separate them out, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about both the villains individually. So Dreykov is some kind of mastermind where he's implanted various moles and agents throughout the world. At no point does he use any of them to really fight Black Widow and Yelena, other than sending like a couple kill squads that kind of dispatched, like, you know, villains of the week or whatever. He states that he can manipulate markets, he can crash governments, and at no point does he do any of those sorts of things to stop these two people. I understand that he himself may not be that powerful, but he has resources and things, and he should be crafty enough that he can make the things difficult. Other than the basic plot of the story is that they take a helicopter, break their dad out of prison, and then they get captured and they break out of another prison, and she breaks her nose and punches him a couple times. Like, that's really kind of all there is to it. Taskmaster himself, herself is a really interesting villain or character, because you can copy any of her colleagues' attacks and fighting styles, but at no point does she change her own fighting style to reflect the fact that they can copy their fighting style. She does the same jump cross legs over the neck throw 3 or 4 times in the movie, and it works every single time. So if I'm able to copy anyone's moves, why am I keep getting my ass kicked? Like, yeah, we get to see a Hawkeye arrow and a Captain America shield throw and a
Did
Black
she get her
Panther
ass kicked
claws.
though?
Taskmaster?
Yeah.
Absolutely. A whole bunch of times. And it was always that same jump neck around, like the legs around the neck thing. When in reality, Black Widow should be the one changing her fighting style to reflect that Taskmaster's changing their style. So someone as smart as Black Widow, who's a world-class assassin, should have some kind of moves that when they're fighting like Captain America, she should know how to take down Captain America or Black Panther or whatever, right? That would make Black Widow the world's greatest assassin, is being able to, kind of like Batman, have contingency plans against all these other heroes. But in reality, she uses the same Black Widow moves over and over and over again.
Right, but the 2 times, and I want Makayla's thoughts on this in a second here. All the times that Natasha faced Taskmaster, she lost. She lost on the bridge. She lost when the arrow got shot, and she would have lost on the ground if it wasn't for the powder coming up. Every single time she lost.
Yeah.
Am I wrong?
Well, what are you going to do when you're driving a car and an arrow explodes underneath you?
Okay, but like, I'm just saying, like, even in the hand-to-hand combat side, she lost. Makayla, you got some, I'm sure, points to bring up from the last few conversations.
Yeah, I love to hear other people's perspectives. It's just one of those things where I just thought that if you're going to adapt, at least let's see that adaptation. But I don't think we ever really got a true, Black Widow didn't do anything out of the ordinary.
And see, this is where like my comment's gonna come in. Like, Devan has definitely great points, and I'm usually as critical for other movies, but because I'm so attached to Natasha, there's just no part of me that cannot love the movie. Mm-hmm. But like with Andy as well, it's not about, like you said, moving the Marvel universe forward. It's just like filling in those gaps. And a part of that, I think, almost is one, like, you have to look at it as a classic superhero movie. After having a phenomenon like Endgame and Infinity War, it is kind of hard to live up to that every single time going forward. But you just can't have like these incredible blockbusters to that scale. It has to be more of like a treat for a Marvel fan like myself that loves Black Widow. And a part of it too, I think, is about giving the past movies new lenses while we wait for the next round of things to come out. So like with this one, the vest, you go back and look at Infinity War and she's wearing it and you're like, oh, hey, that's Yelena's. And it gives things new perspective and it gives you a new lens on almost every other movie that you see, kind of knowing about her past. I think that's kind of the purpose of this one, is a little bit of like I think people thought like that Spider-Man was kind of wrapping it up with Iron Man, but Black Widow wraps everything up by making you go back and watch everything again. And about it's also about Natasha, you know, giving her soul for this, and it ends with that. She was the glue always that held everybody together. And I think that's why when we're looking forward, like there will be a future with Florence as Yelena, of course, but Black Widow's always been about the first act of the MCU movies. And so it's just kind of like that cherry on top of the cake to be like, this was a classic superhero movie. Let's get to our roots. Let's get to just pure nothing, no great stakes. It's just one of those little treats to watch and to maybe just make you go back and think about some things. There is also as well like some things to allude to with, like you said about Alexei. Did he actually meet Captain America? It makes you wonder, has he met the time traveling Captain America? So people think he's nuts, but there is a Captain America that does live out his life. Maybe Alexei has crossed paths with him accidentally. We don't know if that's going to be something that comes in the future. But I think for me, like, I just have to love every aspect of it. Look at it as a classic, look at it as a treat for Black Widow fans. And then just like, you know, go watch Infinity War and be like, oh, Yelena's the best. And that's what it is for me.
I think the thing that's most important that we learned from this movie, though,
okay, go ahead, Andy,
is that Yelena clearly is a Game of Thrones fan, because she does the knife drop against the other Black Widow and stabs her in the chest. Gives her the full on Night King move, which I think is, you know, it's good. She's also learning from pop culture.
Or is that a Bucky Barnes Winter Soldier thing? Given that,
well, she does the Taskmaster does the knife flip. Bucky's the classic knife flip, but I think the, you know, block, stab, drop, catch, stab, that's clearly, that's Arya Stark. That's just what that is.
I think another thing of, you know, Makayla, the Cap part I never even thought about, so bravo to you. That was a really good point there. The thing I kind of look at, the one consequence too, is I think at the end of this, Natasha has kind of been full, right? She's kind of reunited. She has kind of who her family is, right? And then when she gets to Vormir, I think that's one of the reasons she's willing to sacrifice herself. She understands what it means for Clint. And now if you kind of put it all together, she's like, she already knew how important Clint's family was to her, but now she's had the ability to find her family, who that is, who that entity is. It was kind of the last piece that was missing for her. And that made it an ability for her to sacrifice herself on Vormir a lot easier.
There is one thing though that we don't learn, and I thought we would. I don't know how much scale it has to it, but when the Red Skull says she's a daughter of Ivan, we never learn who Ivan is in Black Widow. I don't know if that's something we're going to learn, or if it was just something that Red Skull said that's inconsequential. But that was the one thing I was kind of looking for, was who is Ivan. We learn about her mother. We don't learn about her actual birth father. I don't know if that's going to have an effect on the future of MCU, but it is something interesting to think about as well.
Yeah. Andy, do you know anyone, you know, with your comics knowledge of MC, anything with Ivan at all?
No, I mean, I think it reinforces the fact, almost like even in Endgame, she references that she doesn't know her father, and it's a name that she doesn't recognize. And I think it's almost reinforced here. She doesn't know the name of her mother either. I think it is wrapped up a little bit when Melina says, you know, you were chosen based on a genetic set of circumstances, and basically taken from your parents, or paid, your parents were paid for you. So I think it does kind of answer that a little bit, in terms of, hey, we talked about it that you didn't know your father. Here we are now. We talked about how you don't know your mother, and here's the little bow on it that says this is why, because, you know, you met this certain genetic, you know, predisposition to be a, you know, a great spy, athlete, whatever, warrior, and we paid your parents off to have you back. And, you know, now we learned that her mother basically had that same relentless desire to find her, and that Dreykov killed her for it. So it does kind of wrap up the parent aspect a little bit. The other aspect, Makayla, the point that you're on is, you know, did he fight Cap from another version? You know, you didn't watch the Falcon Winter Soldier, but it could also be, did Red Guardian fight Isaiah Bradley in a previous world? Because at least from a, you know, 70s timeline, that at least that would have fit.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
So there is some what ifs. I agree with Makayla. There's some answers here that you didn't quite get, everything wrapped up in a little bow. But again, I think when a movie is stuck into an existing timeline, it can't move the timeline forward because the timeline is already going past it in 3 more movies.
Yeah.
The point of this is to just simply color in the missing pieces of what we didn't know about, Natasha's past.
And a character that deserved a movie to get her movie. Like Black Widow deserved her movie long ago. I mean, realistically, Black Widow probably should have had a movie before Wonder Woman did. I mean, Wonder Woman, there's a different story of she should have had a movie way before, but as far as what
she should have had a movie before Doctor Strange and Ant-Man, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like you could do a long list of people where like her movie probably would have made more sense.
It took way too long to get to that point.
Really good sense to get it in right after Civil War. Like where they slotted it, it would have made really good sense in terms of just the overall web of the MCU. It would have made a ton of sense in that spot.
I think a thing that helps with this movie too is they take out some of the sexualization of the character that, people had kind of hit on as a negative towards her. Just with Florence Pugh making fun of the poses and everything like that. And, she really is just a kick-ass assassin. So I thought that was a positive message that was kind of sent in this going forward. And I mean, Florence Pugh, I think that was kind of her doing that and being like, hey, like, this is, and Makayla, you hit on it. Unfortunately, Scarlett's always been asked these bullshit questions all the time and all these conferences. Even if she's doing another movie, she's asked about these Black Widow questions. So I think the idea that Marvel had in this as we move forward and get more progressive is they definitely sent Elena's character up to be much different in terms than what the Black Widow character is. I mean, you even saw when she fell out of the vent and does the pose. She's like, no, I'm not into that.
And the irony of that is the comics, the Yelena character is actually more sexualized than Natasha Romanoff is.
Right.
So it's interesting that in the comics they're actually able to retcon away from that aspect and move away from that direction that the Yelena Belova character has in the comics.
Dev, any last thoughts?
No.
Josh, we never heard what you thought of the movie.
I told you, I thought it was a good movie. Like I said, I guess Makayla kind of hit it on it. Just that you kind of just take the Fast 9 side of it, but I guess with this, there's just been different stakes to what Widow is. So that stuff with some of the car crashes kind of bugged me, but for the most part, I thought it was an enjoyable movie. It's about time that Widow got her character. I really love Lawrence Pugh. The vest thing, like you talked about, was great, and I love the family dynamic on this. I think that's the part that I took away from the most was the setting up of the family. And I love, one of my favorite scenes is Elena and Red Guardian in the room. And even before that, when she's like, I can't be a mistake. I'm not a mistake. And she's such a young baby when she was taken away. She didn't know any better. That was her family. And then Guardian doing the American Pie singing to her. I thought that was really touching and really well done and building that dynamic there. So I really love the dinner table scene. It's one of my favorite scenes they've done in Marvel, and I really love the opening scene of it with S.H.I.E.L.D. chasing them. I thought that was a fantastic action scene that was really laid out and added stakes to everything. And I thought, just the progression of Red Guardian too, of when they go to Cuba, you see him going to go to Draco and is like, hey, can I be Red Guardian again? And I'm like, I'm over this shit. Like, I'm done. And I think at that time, he's not realizing, as the movie goes on, he realizes to him how important those times were with the girls and everything like that. But when he gets to Cuba the first time, he's like, man, I'm done doing this bullshit with this family stuff. I'm done with this mission. I just want to be Red Guardian again. And I think as time goes on, he starts to adjust and be like, oh, maybe that was more important and hit me more than what I really realized. Any other last thoughts?
I have to say, I love the best Red Guardian scene in the whole thing is when they get out of the helicopter that crashes because it obviously doesn't have enough gas.
Yeah.
But when he's talking to the girls and he's like, the proud father that his 2 daughters are these fantastic assassins. They've killed so many people. And in his mind, he's like, Father of the Year right here. Look at what I created. It was just so awesome to hear that perspective. And he was like, so proud. And you're like, is this really good father material that you're putting out there?
I'll let you have the final point, Makayla.
Yeah, that just actually reminded me of another point too, Andy. When they're in the helicopter, and Elena and Nat are obviously not very excited to see him or anything. And he mentions, "Oh, are you guys PMSing?" And then they have the whole like uterus talk, was just hilarious, although dark. And it's just one of those funny things too. Like I think as sorry if there's a vacuum in the background.
Yeah, that's okay.
The MCU is trying to get more progressive, and it kind of acknowledges like when women go to work and it's like, oh, she's on her period, and then the girls are like, yeah, because you literally like ripped out my uterus, and they make it very uncomfortable because it's something stupid that has been talked about in society for a very long time. So I love that they kind of brought that up too, and they made it so graphic for him that he was like, oh, okay, sorry.
My bad.
Yeah. All right, well, Sun-Chi's the next one, and hopefully we can have you back for that. Maybe you'll catch up with some of these Marvel shows, but we can have you. You can catch Makayla every Monday on the Big Brother Pod right here, and she will be part of the fantasy football stuff for Fresh Take going forward. So really happy to have her part of the team going forward. And now let's get on to talking about Loki.